Okay, so fair warning, our next poem, Porphyria's Lover, also by Robert Browning, is extremely creepy. I tell my students that this is the Victorian English poem version of a Criminal Minds episode or a true crime podcast. It's pretty disturbing. And it doesn't deal with a duke or a duchess or anyone who's royalty, but it does deal with social class, and we'll get to that in just a minute. So it starts out, the rain set in early tonight, the sullen wind was soon awake. It tore the elm tops down for spite, and did its worst to vex the lake. I listened with heart fit to break, when glided in Porphyria straight. She shut out the cold and the storm, and kneeled and made the cheerless grate blaze up, and all the cottage warm. So I'm going to stop there for just a minute. I'll put my cursor beside it to hold our place. Just like My Last Duchess, Porphyria's Lover is a dramatic monologue poem. So our fictional speaker, I'll go ahead and tell you, is actually insane, more so even than the Duke in My Last Duchess. So Robert Browning obviously has a point, has something he's trying to prove by using this man as the speaker. And so continuing, basically the speaker is sitting alone one night with a broken heart. Porphyria, for whatever reason, comes into his cottage. We think of cottage as a small house, not, he's not royalty, he's not upper class. And she makes the cottage warm. She makes him happy. Which done, she rose, and from out her form withdrew the dripping cloak and shawl, and laid her soiled gloves by, and tied her hair, and let the damp hair fall. And last she sat down by my side, and called me. When no voice replied, she put my arm about her waist, and made her smooth white shoulder bare, and all her yellow hair displaced, and stooping made my cheek lie there. So Porphyria, for whatever reason, and this was not socially acceptable at the time, she has come to this man's house, this man's home, for immoral purposes. She, in other words, is there for what we would call probably today a hookup. And that would not have been, as I said earlier, socially acceptable then. And it's quite a gender role reversal. We think of men as being lustful as being more likely to do something like this. So I want you to think about that at the time. How would people have looked at Porphyria? Would she have been shamed in the face of what happens next? And we'll get to what happens next. I'm right here. Murmuring how she loved me, she, too weak for all her heart's endeavor to set its struggling passion free from pride, and vainer ties dissever, and give herself to me forever. So Porphyria seems to have interest in the speaker, but perhaps she doesn't love him like he loves her. And he says that she's too weak to set her heart's passion free from pride, and vainer ties dissever. Dissever means to let go of. So he is upset or angry because Porphyria will not break these other ties and be with him. And we can imagine that probably the reason for this is that she's of a higher social class than he is. But passion sometimes would prevail, nor could tonight's gay feast restrain a sudden thought of one so pale for love of her, and all in vain. So she was come through wind and rain. Be sure I looked up at her eyes, happy and proud. At last I knew Porphyria worshipped me. Surprise made my heart swell, and still it grew while I debated what to do. And so he sees at this moment admiration and love in Porphyria's eyes. Whether that's imagined or whether that's real, that's what he sees. And he debates what to do. Now, if you haven't already read this, you have no idea what's about to come. That moment she was mine, fair, perfectly pure and good. I found a thing to do. Here, listen to what he does. And all her hair in one yellow string I wound 3 times her little throat around, and strangled her. What? No pain felt she. I am quite sure she felt no pain. As a shut bud that holds a bee, I warily opened her lids again. laughed the blue eyes without a stain. So rewinding a bit, I told you this was disturbing. I warned you. He strangles Porphyria with her own hair, and then once she's dead, he opens her eyes, and there those blue eyes are. So very strange, very odd, very disturbing. And we'll talk in a minute about why he did this. And I untightened next the tress about her neck. Her cheek once more blushed bright beneath my burning kiss. I propped her head up as before, only this time my shoulder bore her head, which droops upon it still. So he's sitting there, and he props the dead, strangled Porphyria against his shoulder, opens her eyes, and there she sits. And he's not weirded out. He's not horrified at what he's done. He sits there, and he's happy because she's there with him. He says that her cheek once more blushed bright beneath my burning kiss. No, it didn't. She's dead. She's pale. But in his mind, she's perfect. The smiling, rosy little head, so glad it has its utmost will, that all it scorned at once is fled, and I, its love, have gained instead. Porphyria's love, she guessed not how her darling one wish would be heard. And thus we sit together now, and all night long we have not stirred, and yet God has not said a word. So at the end of the poem, we're left with this image of the speaker and poor strangled Porphyria sitting there beside him, leaned up against him. And so we don't know what happens past this. Does he get caught? Does he bury Porphyria? What happens? But right now we get the image of him and Porphyria is his object. He's made her an object because she refused to surrender herself to him and to love him like he wanted her to love him. So when he saw that look of admiration in her eyes, he killed her. He wanted to keep her that way. And so at the end, we see that he really is insane. And he's remorseless, I think, even though that could be argued, because at the end he does have this one line, and yet God has not said a word. So I think he wonders if and when he will be punished. I think he knows right from wrong, and he doesn't know, like I said, if he'll be punished. But he does realize that, God must have something to say about this, that this is, immoral. And he tries to justify, why he did it. And so we have to think during this time in Victorian England, Porphyria was what we would refer to as probably promiscuous. She's going to this man's cottage whom she's obviously not married to. Maybe she's married to someone else. Maybe she's not. There's some kind of ties that he refers to here. But would she have been thought as having deserved this death by people of her own time period? Would she not? Obviously, we here in the 21st century don't believe that she deserved what she got, even if what she was doing was immoral or was sinful. This was a terrible way to die. And when we think about this in relation to My Last Duchess, the Duke in My Last Duchess and Porphyria's lover, the speaker in this poem, both are obviously insane in our view, and both, whereas the Duke had the Duchess killed and Porphyria's lover actually killed Porphyria, and for different reasons, they both feel like they should be in control of their lover, their woman, and probably the Duke more so than Porphyria's lover. He really does seem to seek her love. Both are jealous, but I think the Duke is probably jealous to a greater degree. But I think that Robert Browning is sending some of the same messages in both of these poems. One thing that's important to remember about the connection between the two poems is both are dramatic monologues. We have that speaker who is very obviously not the poet in both poems.